Good Monday morning, everybody. I am Angie Callen. And as you know, this is No More Mondays, the podcast where we believe you can have a thriving career or business and an amazing life on your terms. And I bring you guests who not only prove it by having done it themselves, but have amazing resources to help you do the same. For all of you listening to this as a podcast, I do want to remind you that we come at you live via LinkedIn every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain, noon Eastern. So if you want to hear this conversation fresh off the presses, that's where you should tune in every Monday morning. Now, I want to know how you show up in life and work. As a leader, as a team member, as a human, are you leading yourself with purpose and in alignment with your goals? You know, I'm a huge fan of integrating the way we lead into life, the way we work into life, and having those things balance and complement each other versus sometimes the dissonance that we end up seeing in the working world today. And that's why I am excited to introduce you to Coach Al. Al Vazquez is a transformational coach for executives, artists, and radicals who have realized that in order to create impact and change, they must change themselves. From a philosopher to a tech executive and a lot in between, Al channels life and work experience into a coaching business that empowers us to create that alignment, remove resistance, and increase our velocity and impact. Here to help you accelerate and transform, please meet my friend Al Vazquez. Al, welcome to No More Mondays.
Thanks, Angie. I love the name No More Mondays. I just had a great Monday this week.
Yay! Hey, anytime you can have a good Monday, you usually have a good Tuesday through Friday.
Yeah, I started blocking out me time and it turned into like a big hike. And it happened to be peak leaf season here in Ithaca. So it was absolutely the perfect time to go out. And I didn't come back till lunch. So that was my
New England.
No More Mondays Monday.
You know, I do absolutely love Colorado fall. However, there is something about the rainbow of color in New England that is just unbeatable. And also, I'll tell you, I have empowered myself to not start meetings on Mondays until midday. So that way it feels like you can ease into the week, get caught up, not have to work on Sunday afternoons or evenings and have the Sunday scaries. So woohoo for No More Mondays.
No More Mondays.
So I'm going to go there with you. And we're going to talk about the word transformational insofar as it applies to coaching, because I know a lot of people out there probably bristle at the term and they're like, ooh, that's kind of woo woo. But this kind of work really can help people transform and, navigate roadblocks, get to the next level, realize maybe goals that we didn't realize we had. So I want you to explain to everybody maybe what transformational coaching is and is not, and how it's different from other, maybe more professional, mainstream professional types of coaching we see out there, leadership, life, business.
Sure. So starting with sort of what it's not, because it's the most common things to think about, right? It's not training. It's not knowledge transfer. There's a lot of people who are coaches and leadership trainers who transfer knowledge. And there are a lot of people in other fields other than leadership that are also coaches that transfer knowledge. And it's not consulting and it's not using knowledge, right? So it's none of those things. So getting a business coach to teach you about marketing isn't what transformational coaching is all about. Transformational coaching helps you become the thing you're not, that you need to be. So if you're an entrepreneur, you know this pretty well. If you're an entrepreneur who started their life as a 9-to-5 office worker or as a person in a particular job, what got you promoted in that job is not what's going to make you a great entrepreneur. And you constantly run into things like, well, I'm not a good marketer, or I'm not good at sales, or I'm not good at organizing things, or I'm not good at this, or I'm not good at that. And those moments, you need training, you need to learn knowledge, but there's a lot of becoming somebody who does that. And that's what transformational coaching can really help people do. At the entrepreneurship level, that's pretty obvious. There's a lot of things that you have to do as an entrepreneur. But even at the corporate level, I have just as an example, I have a client who's a vice president, and they got feedback from their CEO that they were just not being executive enough, and they had no idea what that meant. And we had a conversation about coaching, and I couldn't teach what it being an executive meant, but I could help him figure it out. And after 3 months, he came back to me and said, "This is the most efficient way I could have transformed into an executive I've ever experienced."
Yeah. Biggest compliment you can get as a coach. And I think there's a piece there. There's a couple of things you said I want to point out. In that particular client example, I think it's important to know that you could teach and train somebody how to be an executive in certain core skills, but ultimately executive leadership is a very intimate thing, and we all do it in our own very authentic way. And so if you can help somebody unlock that, it's going to be so much more powerful and effective than if you had said, do XYZ.
Yeah, no, and there are certain wisdoms that do need to be explored. Some might consider that a transfer or a teaching, right? And one of the wisdoms that I share with people is that leadership is not just a set of skills, and you can't just learn to be a leader. Leadership is a relationship. And the very first leadership relationship you have is the leadership relationship with yourself. Becoming a self-leader who can lead yourself through the transformations you need to go through in order to lead others is not a skill that can be transferred. It's not something you can read about. It's not something that people can teach you. It's something you need support through. And then what you do in leadership ultimately is build your personal, as you said, intimate, authentic relationships. And that looks like something different for everybody.
Yeah. And it's different. Your relationship with yourself will change and grow. And then how you relate to others and all those kinds of things are different. And the word becoming, I think, is so important here, because in the entrepreneurial world, we definitely hear that, like, who do I need to become? Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. Right. And that idea of transformational might seem woo-woo, but in the very end of the day, change doesn't happen in the comfort zone. And so you have to kind of push yourself through and say, wait, who do I need to be in order to get to that goal? Whether it is moving from an individual contributor to a leadership position where you need to understand some of maybe the basic skills and the wisdom, or whether it is building a business and understanding who you are as an entrepreneur and how you relate to clients, or anything kind of in between.
Well, I think the fear or the resistance that, transformation can be a lot of woo is really based somewhere, which is that some people, in order to get over their internal blocks, need to use magical thinking or need to use rituals, and that's for them, and that's great, right? I don't teach rituals. I don't run people through rituals that they don't believe in. That's not a thing that needs to happen. But some people really get value out of that. Other people just need to hear themselves say, "I'm not a salesperson," or "I'm not an expert in that," and then come to the realization that that's not an acceptable position for them anymore. I have a client in New York City who's just an absolute expert in a very niche technology field, does amazing, talks to everybody, and people want to hire him all the time, but his business isn't growing. And when we've gone through the practice of exploring what he needs, he came to the realization, no woo involved, that he needs to become a CEO who sells. He needs to do founder-led sales. He can't keep just saying, "I'm an expert in technology, I'm not good at this." That's no longer the way he needs to be, and he needs to become something else. And the work is supporting him through becoming the person he needs to become to make his business as big as he wants to make it.
I think it's so interesting because you just hit on like a self-limiting belief he had applied to himself, or almost a truth he had applied to himself that put a barrier in place. And I think a lot of times in the world of transformation or change or growth, we need somebody to come in and maybe bring awareness to that limitation that we've applied to ourselves, and or give us permission to go beyond it. Permission, I feel like, is such a huge thing in that transformational world, to say to somebody like, it's okay for you to ditch that limitation.
Yes. There's a certain crop of clients that I have that where the first 2 months ends up being organically a big process of licensure, right? Giving permission, right? Where they tell me that they want to do things and they can't. And we just talk about the fact that they can. And that's a lot of
they haven't.
What's that?
They just won't, or they haven't.
Well, they won't, they haven't, and they believe other people will fight them. Right? That's a big one, is that they believe that there are going to be consequences. And sometimes there will be. Yeah. But it's not a conversation of will there be consequences, it's a conversation of is it the right thing to do?
And I'm wondering if you find in exploring those, let's say the blowback or the consequences, that in walking through the worst case scenario, we find out, oh, wait, the likelihood of that happening is so close to zero. I can remove it from the realm of possibilities, and that builds a little confidence in taking a step forward.
I don't even know if it needs to be like you pick the worst case scenario and then you realize how unlikely it is. I find in my practice that what the fear stops people because they avoid talking to the fear itself. They avoid dealing with the fear. So by avoiding dealing with the fear, they avoid dealing with the work, right? The fear and the work are together. So by supporting people through leaning into examining the fear, they're no longer avoiding the fear, which means they're no longer avoiding the work, and then they can do the work. It's the belief that I have to run away from fear. Yeah. That actually is the problem. And if you actually name the fear, describe it, it loses a lot of power. You got to
keep the lizard brain in check here, people.
What's that?
You got to keep the lizard brain in check here, people.
There's some of that. There's some of that for sure. There's also a lot of power in, okay, if that's the worst case scenario, can you build an action plan? Do you have control over some of the variables that can reduce the risk? And then one of the big moments is, if it's worth doing, it's going to have risk attached to it. There's no way that you're going to do something exciting, exhilarating, and there isn't some form of risk to it. In fact, the safer we make things, the less exciting they are. So getting people to recognize that the same sort of exhilaration they get cliff diving or racing or whatever it is that they do for excitement can be applied to their week. Can be applied to, like, if you want to change your life to make it better, if you want to get rid of that feeling on Sunday night, that's going to come with some risk. It's just going to come with some risk, and you have to lean in.
I said to a group of, I'm doing a mastermind right now with like 10 entrepreneurs. And we were working just last night through a mission, vision, core focus, values kind of exercise. And I got somebody to say the vision that they actually have. And it's like so substantial, so widespread that they were like, I don't even like saying this because it feels like ickily scary because it's so large. And I was like, yeah, the thing that scares you is probably the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And I think what we're talking about here is you as almost like an enabler and an unlocker coming in and helping somebody see those things, equip themselves to, rise into a much greater of the potential that we have that we usually don't use.
Yeah. I mean, I think unlocking is a great term. It's definitely, those are a lot of aha moments in my coaching practice where there's an unlock, and that unlock tends to be a place that people wouldn't go before. Now they're going again, or now they're going for the first time. It also tends to be an unlock of letting something go, right? So you let something go that's just not serving you anymore, that you had locked away and said, I can't let this go. And that's a really important piece as well. Yeah. But the visions being too big is one of those things where honestly, there's no better support than somebody who's willing to share that vision with you in the moment. And some of us have great friends, and some of us have built a personal advisory board. But for executives and for leaders, a lot of that you get from a coach.
And I know, speaking of unlocking and transformation, there's some personal parallels here that you've gone through in the last maybe year or so that I'm guessing have changed, improved, enhanced your approach to this work with clients.
Oh yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about your renaissance and transformation and how it's impacted your perspective on all of this.
Yeah, renaissance is a great word. Yeah, renaissance is a great word. So this year, starting in January of this year, I became aware of some really deep pre-verbal trauma. And it's not that I wasn't aware of the events that caused the trauma, but I didn't think I was carrying trauma at 40, after the age of 40 on this thing. It just didn't seem like I was. And then suddenly it all came at me. So I was born with a ultra rare form of liver cancer, and I was diagnosed at 16 months, and I was diagnosed terminal. They said they couldn't save me, and I went through a lot of pain and suffering. I went through a lot of difficult treatment. My parents went through a lot, and I'm here. I stand here before you, and we managed to
An anomaly. Yay.
An anomaly. Yeah, we managed to prove the doctors wrong. But I was at one of the top cancer hospitals in the world. I was at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and there wasn't even an oncologist who specialized in my cancer because it was so rare that if you specialized in my cancer, you would not work. I think maybe 7 people got it the same year I had it, right, in the continent. So it's this
is the early 80s. The medical world had not evolved and advanced as much as it is now either, which is important to put this in a time and place for that context.
That's true. Yeah, in the early 80s, it was definitely very difficult. It was also cancer incident rates were still climbing well into 2012, 2015. So it was very rare in the early 80s. It's less rare now, but still quite rare. But yeah, I mean, I got people who have gone through things like this know, right? Radiation, chemo, surgery, tons and tons and tons of pain. But I grew up, quote unquote, normal kid, right? My mom even got a letter saying that as a child, I didn't act like a sick kid, that she had done such a great job that I acted like all the other kids who had never been sick, as opposed to the kids who had been sick. So I grew up thinking everything was normal. I never got any therapy. I never got anything to deal with what I had gone through. And yet I had all these problems. And I ended up, needing a lot of mental health support in my 20s and in my 30s. And it wasn't until literally this January where I came to the realization, through sobbing, through trying to tell a story and just not being able to get through it, that actually I have a lot to work through. And this year has been
like a discovery or an awareness of the real root of for lack of a better term, of the challenges that you had been facing through your 20s and 30s. The right solution hadn't presented because the root cause of the issue hadn't really been identified, and then all of a sudden here it is.
Well, I mean, I think for me, it was having Mondays, and it was finally getting over Mondays that actually allowed me to do this work. This is work that I needed to do, and I was never even aware that it was work I could do or that I needed. I just had no access to it. And I quit my full-time tech career 2 years ago, and in that year, I started my coaching business in full force. I needed to learn a ton. I needed to challenge myself, but I also needed to reorganize my life so that I didn't have Mondays. And it took a long time. What's interesting is that this January, not only did I sort of awaken to the work that I needed to do, I also cut out coffee. I cut out caffeine, cold turkey.
Now you're just talking crazy, Al. But this is a controversial statement. I think it's interesting that the circumstances presented themselves in order to help you begin becoming who you needed to be to have the discovery and start processing it for lack of a better term.
Your point about how I bring this into my practice. When I started my practice, I thought I was going to rely more heavily on my executive experience, right? A CTO, VP, director, right? I thought I was going to rely a lot more heavily on that experience and bring that into my practice. And what I found, and I was confused about at first, right? What I found was that where I was getting the most transformation with my clients and where I was getting the most response and where they were getting the most value had nothing to do with that as much as it had to do with the level of empathy and compassion I could bring to the space and create the space for them to light their own fire. And once I kind of awoke into my own like need for healing, I had to start doing way more of that for myself than I've ever done in my life. And I actually had the work that I was doing with my clients the year prior to draw upon, right? To teach me like what I do for others, I can do for myself. And now that I've enriched it in myself, I can do it for others, right? So it's a reciprocal process that's, constantly evolving.
And I love that. I love how you just phrase this, because a lot of times I'll tell people who maybe want to get into coaching or who are coaching but haven't really found their special sauce. And I think this is applicable whether you own a business and you are coaching and using knowledge in that environment, or if you are a leader. The empathy component of what we do and how we interact with humans is foundational to everything. Because I would even say I agree with you that, when you start a business, you're like, okay, you go into the practical mode of, okay, what's my experience? What somebody's going to be able to resonate with, and why they actually end up buying, for lack of a better term, is because they see you as a human who they trust. And it is that relationship piece that ends up creating outcomes and all those kinds of things. So it ends up being so much more personality and lived experience than it does practical work experience that brings value to these engagements.
Well, and I think you're hitting on the empathy thing, and what's chattering in my mind is self-leadership, right? And there's this belief that we have as entrepreneurs that we have to be a certain way, and we don't have empathy for ourselves. And until we can unlock that empathy for ourselves, we struggle as entrepreneurs. But similarly, anybody who's trying to make a better life for themselves, even the people who are like, I've been in the same job for 20 years and I just want to change and I don't want to rock the boat too much. They chase after productivity experts, or they chase after, right, like discipline or things that experts can teach them that they can put in action, but they don't learn empathy for themselves, right? And leaders need empathy for who they're leading. And when you're trying to lead yourself to a better life, when you're trying to lead yourself to a week without a Monday, right? You have to have empathy for the person that's following you, which is you.
Yes, we are terrible at giving ourselves grace. And I'm so excited because, first of all, Al gets the prize for referring to the name of this podcast the most in any. And so I love how integral it is to you. But one of the things we always do on this show is give people some practical advice. And, for backstory on everybody out there, Al and I have known each other for a few years. We met right around the time he started his business. And so I decided we had some talking points, and I was like, let's see where this goes. And now I know the advice and the practical tips I think we should give people to get unpractical in how they think about their self-leadership and their empathy, because that's where I really want to kind of dig in is, let's say somebody's out there stuck in that, belief, lacking empathy, lacking grace. We are so hard on ourselves.
Totally.
And that's what keeps us back from having thriving careers, businesses, and amazing lives. Y'all, like, how's that for tying it back to my freaking mission? But like, what can we do to ourselves, maybe before we engage somebody, or to prime the pumps, to kind of embrace that idea of self-leadership, lean into it, explore it, and build empathy for ourselves? What can we do?
Sure. So I like to do things in sort of pairs, active and passive. One of the things that I think is really critical is to actually create empty space. So we have to give up false beliefs, but what new beliefs should we replace them with is the wrong question, right? We need to just be okay with not having certain beliefs.
Yes.
So if you have a negative belief about yourself and you say, what should I replace it with? The first thing you should do is you should be capable of saying, I don't need to replace with anything yet, which feels weird because you might have to tell somebody, I don't know what I believe about myself. And that's sort of
so uncomfortable.
Super uncomfortable, but it's the space you need. So that's sort of a passive way of thinking about a practical tip. And then an active way of the flip side of that is when you have a negative thought, when you are upset about something, when you think it's impossible to solve, or when you think everything is happening to you, actively saying, either in your head or out loud, that's just not true. Just being in the behavior of fighting back, that's just not true. is going to, over time, create the empty space. Because then, well, what is true? If it's not true that I'm never going to make it, if it's not true that this is just my life until I retire, if it's not true, right? But if you don't ever fight back and say that's not true, you don't create the space that you need to start filling it in with a new belief. Like, well, what could there be? If it's not true that this is my life until I retire, well, what is true? And that's actually what creates the movement.
The idea that I'm okay with not knowing is very difficult for people, especially nowadays that we have an information superhighway literally at our fingertips. The instant gratification is amazing, but probably one of the elements that is the biggest detriment to us, because we're not okay with that empty space, which means then we never give ourselves the bandwidth to sit and see what comes. React to it, fight for it if it's the right thing, and just allow that. In a way, it's a little bit of a meditative kind of cycle of, I'm going to allow myself space, see what comes into it. Does that serve me, or do I need to talk against it so that then I can see what else comes in? And it's a really interesting passive active cycle and how they work together.
Yeah. Because if you resist a thought and no thought replaces it, it creates a space for a new thought. And if another thought comes in and it's another negative thought, like, well, this will never work, right? You keep resisting, you keep practicing and developing. I mean, that's, people will talk about this as a CBT thing, right? As cognitive behavioral therapy, or they'll talk about it as a good habit, or they'll talk about it as affirmations, whatever you want to say. We can see this in the real world. If somebody walks all over you, and you never resist them, they just keep walking all over you.
You've set a precedent.
So again, self-leadership and empathy for self, if you keep telling yourself, this is how my life is, and it's going to be terrible in this way for a very long time, or I'm not good enough to make that happen, or I don't have what it takes, or I don't know enough people, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't, whatever. You're walking all over yourself and you're not resisting.
And you've established that as like a foundational truth without ever questioning it, which in a way goes back to some of the things you were talking about with your own journey and those realizations from childhood of there were like deep-seated truth and beliefs that came from something that was essentially handed to you.
That's right.
That you never stopped and really questioned and evaluated and challenged until
and the beauty of creating that space and not knowing what's going to fill it, right, really hit me this summer when I visited my dad. And we had never talked about my cancer journey and really his journey of what it felt like. And 40 years later, it was the very first time I felt compelled, the need to thank my father for saving my life. That was, it never really occurred to me because I didn't fully understand what had happened. And everybody thought everything was normal. So like, what was there to say if everything was behind us and
fine, everything was fine.
So I discovered this opportunity to really connect in a way that was just not possible had I kept with this false belief that, this happened and there's nothing I can do about it. And there's nothing worth exploring here. It's just something I have to deal with right now. Now that I'm in it, beautiful opportunities keep opening up.
Okay. So you just literally went where I was thinking, because we all know the 4-letter F word, fine. And most of us live in that space. Mm-hmm. And it is okay. And it's a little bit of ostrich syndrome, right? Of like, I'm just going to stay here and be fine. And whether you're naive or ignorant to the fact that there are things to unpack, or you just choose to turn the blind eye and be the ostrich, there is a certain level of unknowing you will always have about yourself. And it's funny how that you bring this up and the timing of this, because I tell people all the time that there is no better exploration into self-discovery than entrepreneurship. And isn't it funny that in a way that's also what brought you to this doorstep, because you will find out things about yourself and vulnerabilities and characteristics about yourself that you may not want to know, but the awareness and the knowing and the ability to then transform them is so much greater than if you had just stayed mediocre.
Yeah, people want everything to be a science because science is replicable, which makes it a sure thing and safe. But if entrepreneurship was a science, then it would be replicable and everyone would be able to do it, and there'd be no big failures. There wouldn't be any of the stories and any of the drama. So it's not a science. There is sciences that you can draw from to learn, but entrepreneurship requires you to just do really difficult things. And the most difficult things are believing in yourself
and becoming
that 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, you never believed you could do.
I know. I think it's just so absolutely incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I guess if you've never been through it, hopefully what Al and I are doing right now is encouraging you to open up. And it doesn't mean you have to go cut the cord, quit your job, and become an entrepreneur in order to embrace self-leadership, safe self-discovery, and be more empathetic with yourself. However, it's more about the two of us having probably some shared experiences in what brought us to that point of self-discovery, self-leadership, and empathy that make us want all of you to understand just how incredible these kinds of transformations are.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship, I've heard it said, and I think it's very true. And forgive the woo, but entrepreneurship is a spiritual journey because you really have to draw on, even if you don't have faith with a capital F, you have to have faith during the darkest parts of your sales cycle, during the darkest parts of your cash flow. You just got to choose to believe that it's going to work out, or you will give up. And
you got to think and grow rich. There you go. If you've never read that book, I just gave you the secret. This is it. And I think it's just I love talking to somebody who has a shared perspective on this, but also the fact that we both come from similar places in working in technical backgrounds and engineering and technical leadership, and how sometimes this just seems so different when really it's also intertwined. And, one of the reasons I started No More Mondays was to help people hear stories like this of like, oh, wow, I can do something different or more fulfilling. I can like myself. I can do all of these things that we are so good at saying that we can't. And we continually try to fill the empty space because we're not comfortable with not knowing. But the beauty lives in the not knowing sometimes. And that idea that you were saying something a minute ago that I kind of also equated to that, like faith with a capital F, science, right? The art of entrepreneurship, or even the art of transformation, there has to be an element of unknowing. If everything was scientific, and if we knew what God looked like or how big or small he was, or we knew what faith was, it wouldn't exist because we wouldn't have an unknowing to work towards.
Well, this is what, like executives that lead organizations in the market, they know that everything is experimental. If it was a science, their competitors would be doing it too, right? So you have to have a level of unknowing, and you have to take specific risks, and that unknowing has to be baked into what you do. But as people who haven't taken that part of the journey yet, most of what we have to do, and our bosses, required this of us, we had to exude confidence that it was knowable, known, doable, done, right? Like we had to act like it was just an assembly line, that we had to act like everything was within the realm of repeatable science. And when I look back, now that I'm here and I look back on my 20 year career, I realize that I thought I was doing it from skill and knowledge entirely, that I needed more knowledge and more skill and more knowledge and more skill. And that's how I got where I got to. And then when I look back on it, I realized, no, it was my ability to convince myself that I had a better idea, and my willingness to put it out there, be vulnerable, because I could have been wrong. And oftentimes I was. And the emotional maturity to actually take critique, the emotional maturity to let people, come at the idea and throw something different at it without reacting heavily. And by doing those things, not knowledge and skill, right? But sort of maturity and relationship and faith in myself, in my work, and in what I thought I could do. I mean, I did incredible things with that. It allowed me to maximize my skill and my knowledge, but I'm massively ignorant.
Well, but I also have to give yourself credit because there's like an internal wisdom that got applied there. So we talk so much about skills, experience, and knowledge being the thing that gives us our professional capability, drives us forward, gives us growth potential. However, there's a very important W that comes into that on how you apply your skills, experience, and knowledge, in a way that makes you a little bit different. And I think that's where we go back to the internal idea of understanding the leader inside, the drivers inside, and having empathy with yourself to get in touch with that wisdom.
Yeah. One of the things a coach friend of mine turned me on to is this kind of analysis of the coaching market and the equivalent coaching consultants, mentors, and that there are 4 main value propositions in the marketplace. And they are knowledge, experience, insight, and wisdom. And like 90% of offerings are knowledge and experience offerings.
Which means they're training.
They're either, here's a body of knowledge and I'm an expert in it, or here's a thing I did, I'm going to show you what I did, right? And then there's the insight, which is maybe like 8% of the rest of the market, which is, people who have a very wide divergent view and are capable of drawing connections between things that other people might not be capable of. Right? And then there's like 2% of what the market offers is wisdom, and selling wisdom is nearly impossible, and buying wisdom is incredibly hard, and transferring wisdom is still like mystery after thousands of years of trying to do it, right? But there's this piece of offering wisdom in the marketplace where that wisdom shows up as compassion, it shows up as empathy, it shows up as permission to have more grace than you've ever had before, recognizing that grace is just understanding mistakes is how we grow, right? And like that's the important thing, right? So that offering of wisdom is what I've been aspiring to kind of since I've heard that framework, because I've realized I don't want to teach people what I know. What I know gets obsolete very quickly. And I don't want to share only my experiences, because everybody's experience is different. I'm a white man in technology in America. Like that's a very
special.
that experience has a limited shelf life. Right. And yeah, we could do insights, but I don't really want to be doing like market analysis and consulting in that way. I help people unlock that self-compassion and that leadership relationship with themselves so that they can go out there and build that leadership relationship with others, and rebuild their leadership relationship with others after they've hit their ceiling. And that ceiling is an internal one, right? They stopped having enough compassion for themselves to move forward. Yep. So that's what I do.
You help people transform. How's that for the mic drop moment of this Monday?
Boom.
Love it. I always enjoy. I feel like anytime I talk to Al, I walk away a little bit more enlightened. And there is the philosopher inside of the technology executive coming out. And I so appreciate you being here and spending time with me and helping me think through some transformational things I'm working on, but also your willingness to be vulnerable about the life experiences that have put you exactly where you're supposed to be. So thank you.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
I know. And if you do not follow Al here on LinkedIn yet, you should. He is a different kind of content creator that is refreshing and thought-provoking, and I appreciate it. And again, Al, thank you so much for being here. The work that you're doing to help people be better versions of themselves. And have greater impact because of it. If all of you out there would like the details from today's episode, visit us at nomoremondays.info. And again, we go live every Monday morning here on LinkedIn. So if you want to catch these conversations in the flesh, tune in. And then if you can't catch them on the RSS feeds later that afternoon, this will be uploaded later so you can listen to it 5 times, because there is tons of amazing wisdom in this conversation. I want to thank Al one more time. Follow him on LinkedIn. And thank you all out there so much for joining me on this episode of No More Mondays. I'll see you next week for another live edition of the podcast.